Hello, we are going to work on our spooky house today. The first thing, this is going to be a watercolor background. So the first thing we need to do is plan out, all right, where is this house going to be? So the first thing we'll do is draw the house. I went maybe a little higher up than I would normally. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to be like, this house is on a hill. So it's flat. And then my hill drops down. This house is in a very treacherous place. You don't want to step off the hill. All right, we're gonna start at the top of our house. And that's because we wanna make sure we have room for the top of the house. As you can see, eventually we'll have a sun. But for the first part of the house, let's go ahead and make this rectangle. And then inside this rectangle, we're gonna make another rectangle. This can be very messy and very imprecise because it's a spooky house, and that is how spooky houses work. And then we're gonna divide this into the little window panes. The top of this house looks a little bit like a witch hat. So I'm gonna give it its little pointy hat. And it's kind of funky little curvy edges there. The next part of our house, we're gonna come out on either side just a little bit. And we're gonna go back in just a little bit. So that's our little roof. And then we'll go in just a little bit and come down on either side and make another rectangle. And then we'll add a window inside this one. That is another rectangle. And you can make these 4 pane, 9 pane, whatever you feel like doing, 6 pane. Over here, I'm gonna make it a little different. I'm gonna come down from the, like underneath that point, I'm gonna come out and make a little triangle, and I'll do the same thing on the other side, but I want it to be bigger. And then underneath this one, we'll put a little bitty window that's round. And under this one, we'll put a bigger window that's round. And then we can kind of enclose those and come right over to that rectangle. All right, now for the bottom story of the house. Let's come out like almost to the edge of your paper and then back in. And then over here, something kind of similar. But it doesn't have to be exactly the same because again, this is a very rickety old house. And then we'll come down to our hill. And now all that's left is to put some windows and a door. So I'm gonna add over here, I'm gonna have like a curvy window that comes down to the ground. And it's gonna have a little bit of that going on. And then it's gonna be 2 this way, 2 this way. And it's a little wonky. Now I'm making my lines silly on purpose. Then over here, I'm gonna make 2 windows that are sort of the same. And then I will make them, should we be 9 pane or 6 pane? Let's make these 1 in the middle and 2 on the sides. So there's those windows. And now I just have the door. I don't really need to make the outline of the door because this house will be in silhouette and it will all be black. However, just for fun, just so we understand this is where the door is, I'm going to give the door a top window that is rounded just for some variety in there, and maybe make it look like a spider web. Ooh. And then I'm going to give it 2 little windows down here. All right, we've got our house drawn. We can add a little weather vane up here if we want. So I'm going to go ahead and add the weather vane. And you could have really like whatever shape you want on top of the weather vane. You could have a bird, you could have something scary, you could have a letter. Let's see, what do I want on my weather vane? I think my weather vane is going to have a crescent moon on top. There we go. All right, so we're ready to get started with the painting portion almost. I found this lid that's round, and I made a pencil circle behind my house, kind of partially on top of my house, partially behind it. That's where I'm going to paint my moon. So you can decide if you want a moon. If you don't want a giant moon, you can have a little moon. Something like this would work as well if you want your moon to be far away. But my moon's going to be absolutely gigantic. And I might have a tree. I might have a howling coyote over here. I might have some bats going on, flying through. I might have a witch flying through. I might have some crows. But I'm going to decide that all later. For now, I'm going to get started painting the scene. So here we go. All right, let's get started painting this house. The first thing I'm going to paint is my moon. And I have made sure, so I used a Sharpie in here to do my line work. If you used pencil, that might be the better idea, but I used a Sharpie so you could see it on the video, but I want to make sure that that Sharpie is nice and dry before I start painting over it. It will be water fast if it's dried. If it hasn't, it's iffy. First thing I'm going to do is paint my moon. So I'm going to add yellow to this circle. And remember, it doesn't matter if we paint over this house because it's going to be silhouetted and black at the end. So we can paint over the house. The windows will be yellow anyway, so we can just paint over the house as we go. It's all good. It's fine. I think my Sharpie is dry. Nothing seems to be causing problems right now. So I'm adding yellow, but I want it to be maybe a little lighter than I've started out here. So I'm going to add some more water. I'm just going to make sure that I also get some yellow in all the little windows of this house. So got my yellow moon going on. I'm trying to make this pretty light. Don't need it to be too dark. Make sure I get that whole circle filled in. And if it is too dark, you can dry out your brush and just roll it over that moon and lift a little bit of that paint off. Like this. Alright, I'm gonna add a little bit of, I think I'm gonna add a little bit of orange to my moon. Just to make it a little spookier. So I'm going to add some orange here, there, throughout my moon. Water it down a little bit. Kind of just dab it around and let it fade into the yellow of that moon. However it's going to. It can look kind of like a spooky blood moon. All right, so I'm going to tippy tap this, and this is all still damp, so as I tap through, that orange is just going to blend right in. And I'm not tapping where I have windows on the house, because that would just be light. We're not actually seeing the color of this moon. And the hardest part about this is we're going to have to make sure the edges of this moon are nice and dry before we start painting the sky. That's not fun, waiting, but that's the way watercolor works. So I've got my moon looking the way I want it to look. I think what I'll do is just color in this hill down here. My hill's not gonna have anything on it. It's just gonna be a plain old hill. So I'm gonna paint this in black. What I'm gonna do is avoid this boundary here so that I can go work on that sky in a little bit. Oh, this black paint is not really sticking. You can do your black and, oh, I didn't avoid the edge, did I? Like I said I was gonna do. You can do the black part in marker also. If your paint is being goofy like mine. There we go. Okay, now I think it's working a little bit better. But if you don't want to do the silhouette black part in paint, I think it's absolutely fine to just color that part in marker. Like if you have a bigger black marker. Sometimes when you touch the paper a lot with your oily hands or an eraser, it can make this paint not want to stick. And I believe that is what is happening to me here. But that's all right. I'm gonna let this paint dry and come back and put another coat on here, and eventually this black paint will stick to the paper, I think. But gosh, that's frustrating, huh? There we go. It's getting a little bit thicker. So we're gonna paint this whole hill. It's just gonna be black paint. And the reason I chose to paint the moon first instead of painting the sky first and then the moon, my sky is going to be colors that are dark. And I would rather paint the light color first, because if a little bit of that light color runs into my dark color, no problem. I can cover it right up. If I have wet paint on my moon and my dark color runs into it, that's going to be kind of a mess and difficult to clean up, and I'm probably going to have to find a solution like making a witch flying on a broom in silhouette over that spot, because it's tough to fix. It can be kind of frustrating. All right, so I've got my ground, got my moon, and now we want to get this edge nice and dry. So you can either let it dry or you can grab something to kind of fan it with. Or if you have like a hair dryer or something, you can use a little fan that plugs in. You can fan it with that. I'm going to just use this piece of paper. I think that's going to work well for me. I'm not super worried about this black part drying. I am not very concerned about that right now at all. But I definitely want to get my edges of this moon drying nicely. I've just picked up another piece of art to fan it with, but if you have an actual fan, that's exactly the tool you want. Dry, moon. Can take this time to tell our favorite spooky story. I hope you're thinking about what colors you want your sky to be. My sky is probably going to be purples and blues, but you could put some red in there. I mean, it's a spooky house. The sky could be very spooky. How are we doing, paint? Oh, it's still a little bit wet. All right. All right, I think we're getting closer to dry now. I'm going to touch it. It does seem pretty dry. Just for good measure, I'm going to fan it a couple more times. And we can get started on our background. All right, I feel good about this. I'm going in. For my sky, I'm gonna have the areas, I still have a little bit of black in my paintbrush. That's okay, the sky is gonna be very dark. For the areas down here, I'm gonna use kind of this, I'm gonna start with purple. So it's gonna be nice and purpley down here. But this is where the real fun begins, because you can mix your colors up. I can work in purple and then I can go into blue and just mix that blue right in there. And I'm being careful around the edges. Oh, I touched this paper way too much with my oily hands, I can see. But I'm gonna go blue and purple in the sky, kind of all the way around. I can add some red if I want to, but I want a lot of nice dark color. And we can paint right over the house if we want to, because we're gonna go over that house in black, but I'm gonna try to be careful against this edge because I know that it might bleed a little bit. It might blend where I don't want it to blend. Ah, I hit the edge. So I'm using blue and then I'm gonna go back into purple. Get some more of that nice purple in there. Ooh, that's fun. I love this purple. And I'm gonna add water. I don't want this to get really thick like it's doing there. I want it to be a little thinner than that because it gets very opaque and we don't have that pretty fluid sky look when it gets too thick. We still want some of that white from the paper peeking through the color. So I'm going to try to go just around the edge of this moon real quick. And because that moon was dry, we can do that. But if your moon was not dry, do not attempt that just yet. It's not the time. All right. This black looks dry, so I'm going to go along the edge of the black with that blue and finish out this little section down here. If you are one of those people who enjoys using salt in your watercolor, in the sky, you absolutely could use some salt. It'd be a great place to do it. I am not going to use any salt because I didn't warn you at the beginning that you needed salt, so I don't want anybody to feel like, come on, you didn't tell me to get any salt, Kasey. All right, so I like to just go around that shape and make sure it's all nice and smooth. I'm gonna get a little more paint, dab some of that blue in there so we have that pretty purple and blue together, and then finish out this little tiny piece of sky. Maybe add some purple to it. I love watching the paint bloom. It's like fireworks, but in lovely slow motion. I've got a little edge there that didn't quite make it all the way to the moon. Same here. And then I have this space over here that needs to be sky colored. All right, so that is the whole sky. Now all that's left to do is the black part of the house. What's super important is that everything is dry. You can do this black part in paint or you can do it in marker, whatever is more comfortable for you. Sometimes it can be a little easier to color this in a Sharpie, maybe like a Sharpie with a fatter tip on it. But I'm gonna try and paint. But what I wanna make sure, like before, is that all of the edges are very dry before I go anywhere near them with that black paint, because the black paint will absolutely bleed into those other colors. So I'm going to fan a little bit around the edges of where I just painted that, but I think I'm going to be pretty safe in the main parts of my house. The parts that are inside the moon, I'll definitely be safe with because I know that moon is dry. Or I'm pretty confident that the moon is dry. So I'm going to load my brush up. I'm going to make sure that this black paint is sort of inky. I don't want it to be very watery. Ooh, that's nice against that moon. And since we already put the shape of our house in here, it's just a matter of getting it colored in, whether you are using paint or a marker. So I'm going to color in this top part. Make sure I have that fun little curl on the gable of this roof. And then here's why it doesn't have to be very perfect. Because the only thing that's not getting painted black is the inside of those windows. So everything else just gets painted black. And if we want, I can go back over these lines for the window panes too. And I think what makes it fun with paints is it's hard to get these lines quite perfect, right? Because I'm using the brush that came with my paints. And if they're a little bit rickety looking, I think it just makes it spookier. And spooky is exactly what we're going for here. So no harm done. So then I'm going to continue painting in these darker parts. Making sure that that black paint is fluid enough where it's not going to dry gummy, but it's still going to move across our paper nicely. So I can paint in all of these parts, even though we drew different little squares to get them set, they're all connecting together at this point. So we can paint them all in. We just want to leave those windows unpainted. And sometimes I like to just go over my lines and try to make things a little more pointy, a little more spooky. It's a dangerous game. Sometimes it causes you to make mistakes you didn't count on, but then sometimes it looks really great. So here we go. Working through the rest of our spooky house. I enjoy painting like this. I like that nice thick black. It's cool. All right, I'm going to paint around this little round window. Just close it in. And then these are some tiny window panes, but I think I'm still going to try and do them with paint. Add a little more water to my black. And then I'm going to come down. Work on this windows area. Get it all fixed in there. And then I'm going to add its window panes. And we're almost done with the second floor. We'll add these window panes. And then we can paint the first floor. I do want to make sure this looks like it's drying very nicely, so I'm comfortable painting right there next to it. If yours doesn't look dry, maybe avoid that area first. Go paint somewhere else first. But anywhere I have a nice, even, wide area, I like to paint that in. That seems to make it a little easier to get to the other places. And it doesn't matter if we go down into our hill because it's all in silhouette. And I may paint back over that hill anyway. So, adding the bottom to that window. Can't tell if this is going to be too gummy, so I'm adding a little bit of water just in case. And then I can darken this hill a little bit with kind of a second coat of paint. We'll get the door painted in. And the door, we're not painting the, we're only leaving the windows unpainted. So even though we drew a door, it was just so we would know where to put those windows. So we're only leaving the window part unpainted. Then I think I'm going to go back and do the window panes here that I did not do before. And like I had said up at the top, when these are more uneven, it gives it a little bit more of a spooky off-kilter look. So I don't mind that these aren't completely symmetrical or they're not the same as the one next to it, because that just makes it more creaky, spooky house-like. All right. And do the window panes in the top of my door, which I designed a little bit complicated, didn't I? I was not thinking ahead that I would be doing this with my paintbrush. That's okay. I can leave that just in Sharpie if I want to. If I feel like that's too difficult or I might mess up, I'm just going to leave it in Sharpie because I don't think anyone really is going to notice that. We will know because we're doing this painting together, but no one else will know. All right, I'm going to make this little piece of my house cute and curly. And then we'll close in this window. With our nice dark black, whether you're using paint or marker. I'm going over my little lines in the window. There we go. And then my hill needs some work. My hill is not dark and silhouette-y enough. So I'm going to add another little coat of thin black to it to darken it up and get it nice and spooky. And then I want you to let your creativity loose and you can decide what's going on your spooky hill. Or will there be some birds or witches or bats flying around? What's happening in your scene? Maybe there's an old rickety tree on the edge of this hill. Whatever you feel like you want to add. I think I do want to add like I think I want an old rickety tree that's kind of coming off the side of the hill. Maybe it's an old weeping willow. Oh, I should have checked to see if that was dry. I didn't do it. Ah! Okay, well, I'm gonna fix that later. Nothing that can't be fixed. But I think that paint was not quite dry enough for me to start adding tree parts to just yet. So I'm just making some little branches. Now I'll have a place to put some birds maybe if I want to. So trees are just like making a bunch of the letter Y and then making more Y's on the end of those Y's. So it's dry up here, it's just not dry down there. All right, now I know. So I'm working in some little tree branches. Kind of making this tree very bendy and twisty and gnarly. Hanging off the side of this yard. And to make these little thin lines like this, you want to make sure that you don't have too much paint in your brush, because that can keep you from being able to make those nice little fine lines. So I'm gonna fill in down here. See how this is working? Okay, now we're doing better. I want these to kind of all be hanging down in a spooky way. Spooky tree. So there's a fun spooky tree. What else might we have in our spooky house area? Maybe a bird. Let's have a bird on the top of this tree, like a big black bird. So for a bird, I like to make kind of a round body, because birds tend to have a body that is a little bit round, and then it's going to have like a scraggly tail because it's a spooky bird. And then it has a little neck and a head. And of course a beak, but I'm going to give it some feet. So there's my spooky bird. I think that's all I want to do, but you could add bats. You could add, like I said, a flying witch. You could put some little faces in the house. But there you go, my friends. There is your spooky house. I think my edges are dry, so I'm going to go ahead and take this tape off. I do have a little bit of Sharpie because I drew my house before I put the tape on. But I can go over that with some whiteout or whatever and get rid of it. A little bit of a security breach over here. But like we know, that happens. It's all right. Oh yeah. There we go. I am loving this. I need to sign it, don't I? I'm gonna sign it in Halloween orange. Woo! All right. Whoa. There's our spooky house, y'all. Happy Halloween!